You can be disgusted, but don't you dare say that you're surprised. You were warned about all this, I know, because I'm the one who warned you. What you see going on here, these obviously fake pretend gestures at acknowledging reparations, it is in fact white supremacy attempting to strike back and to hijack the movement and to subvert it. Nancy Pelosi's phony baloney support for a bill to study reparations, it's just a Trojan horse, folks. The legislation to study reparations, there's nothing new about that. Nancy Pelosi has been one of the main ones stonewalling a federal study of reparations all these decades. She's never supported it. Do you truly think that she's discovered religion now? No, it's because they saw what we could do to a major party candidate. We could crush one in a matter of days without big money, and that there's nothing that they can do about it. So they have to do something, and this is what they're trying to do. But even this is in bad faith. To me, it's almost a joke. The same federal government who enslaved us, who fought to keep us in chains, who enacted law after law after law to dehumanize us and to legalize the harming, killing, and imprisonment of black people, is now going to investigate their own criminality? You can't see the scam here? Gee, this sounds just like the police departments who investigate themselves whenever a cop murders a black person. And exactly how many times have the police departments determined that they were in the wrong? Here's a better question. How many of those police departments have actually come up with procedures to punish cops who kill black people? How many of them have done that? None of them admit that they're wrong, and none of them take any sort of corrective policy measures. And whatever federal study is undertaken, it's going to have the exact same result. Do you expect the administrative arm of white supremacy to behave differently than the enforcement arm of white supremacy? You're sitting here thinking that somehow we can put our faith in the same Democrats who are nothing more than left-wing white supremacists? Well, let me go ahead and take some of the suspense out of it for you. Any study that comes from this sick white government is going to be completely geared toward exonerating themselves. That's all that's going to happen. It's going to be a classic, just a masterpiece of minimalization. That's something that white power can always be counted on, to bestow innocence on themselves, no matter how vile their behavior, no matter how bad it is. Well, you see, it's not as bad as all that, and it's the circumstances. Let us white-splain the circumstances to you. They're going to have some white organization, no doubt one of these white think tanks, which are founded, financed, and run by hardcore white supremacists, and they're going to be using every means that they can to deny, or at the very least, to minimize the price tag for what is unquestionably the greatest crime in human history. Now, if you think the white supremacists at these think tanks, who were the ones who come up with these pathetic crime stats talking points, where do you think those talking points come from? Heather McDonald with her phony baloney fiction book, The War on Cops. She's the kind of person who manufactures these fraudulent talking points about black crime statistics. And if you think that those kind of talking points are ridiculous made-up mathematics, you ain't seen nothing yet. This is who these white supremacy Democrats are going to call in to conduct any sort of reparations study. Who they won't be bringing in, however, are any black academics, any black experts who actually have studied the issue. This is not an attempt to study reparations, family. It's an attempt to cover it up, to pacify you by pretending that they're going to finally start some movement on reparations after over 150 years of declaring that they'll never do it. Since I know that some of you have depended on the federal government to support you for all these decades, and your parents and your grandparents before you have, I know that it's inconceivable to you that the same good white folks who you depend on for your daily bread would actually have it in for you. I know that that's a shocker. But you know what else I'm aware of? Willful stupidity is still stupidity. Let me go ahead and save you the suspense, family, how this reparations study is going to go from this white supremacy regime, how it's really going to turn out. They're going to go and get the Brookings Institute or some other white supremacist front, who will then claim that they put together a diverse panel of experts to look into the issue. They'll use the word diverse as a means to hopefully fool you. But anyway, it's a conversation, a show that's going to be put on for the public in general. It's going to be telling the public, hey, when these niggers try to claim that this reparations study group was just a fraud, go ahead and tell them it was a diverse group. So that means that you can't complain. It was diverse. But the experts aren't going to include people dedicated to getting us what we're owed. Diverse is white code for politically diverse. And we all know what that means. Hell, Matt Damon, dumb as he is, he sat there and told you that diversity belongs in front of the camera, not behind it. In other words, diversity, you niggers need to just stand in front of the camera while the white guys tell you what to do. And whenever you have these white left-wingers talking about diversity, they mean quote-unquote political diversity, a diversity of views. But it doesn't mean a diversity of viewpoints and backgrounds. It means the so-called reparations study group is going to consist of career racists like Charles Murray and Heather McDonald, and it's also going to consist of professional apologists for white supremacy like Thomas Sowell. That way they can claim, see, we had some black folks on there. You can't say they were all white. Yeah, but they're all white supremacists in the raw, or at least white supremacist supporters. And any black people who are on our side who would call themselves trying to become a part of this proposed study group, they're going to be dismissed out of hand. Look, if these white supremacists were willing to set up a phony congressional study of the assassinations of Dr. King and even John Kennedy, a white president, then do you truly think that they're suddenly going to be honest about what's been done against you and me? You think that all of a sudden they're going to discover religion where you and I are concerned? You should expect Chuck and Nancy to pat themselves on the back for having assembled a diverse group of experts who will be almost entirely white and certainly some Asians in there. Everyone but black people to discuss what these other groups have done against us. And this diverse group of anti-black propagandists, they're going to determine that these so-called damages done to black people have been way overblown. Expect them to be bold about that. Well, you know, it really wasn't as bad as all that. And then they're going to try to claim that any little thing that the federal government did somehow constitutes reparations. That, well, if black people were able to sign up for any program, even if they couldn't sign up in numbers, if there was some program that black people were able to sign up for, well, that counts as reparations, you know. The kind of asinine deflections and lies that you normally hear from right-wing hate radio, you're going to be hearing it coming from the mouths of your good white liberals. They're going to be saying that government public assistance programs have helped the black community and that this has been de facto reparations. That's what Kamala Harris was doing with her little trial balloons for that Lyft program crap she's talking about. Well, everyone's going to be able to sign up for it and see this is going to help black people. You heard the question. You know that it's all about bridging the economic gap to make sure that black people are on the same economic footing with everyone else, which means that we got the same amount of money in our pocket as everyone else. Well, we're not going to be bridging that, but we'll make it where everyone has access to the same money. No, you don't get to do that after you've been crippling black people for 400 years. You don't get to then turn around and say, oh, but we're going to pay the same when everybody else has a hell of a lot more stockpiled up than us. Everyone else has a lot more access to resources than us. There's a phrase that I like for you guys to start memorizing, and that is, there is nothing more unequal than the equal treatment of unequals. And when it comes to economics, due to white supremacy, black people are unquestionably unequal compared to anyone else, especially white people. Your good white liberals, your good white Democrats, if they ever do decide to put together this fraud of a reparations study, what they're going to be claiming is that black colleges and universities and even the NBA are reparations. Expect them to shoehorn that in there, by the way. They're going to claim that affirmative action was reparations. Anything that they can claim that the white government had a hand in, whether they actually did something or not, it's suddenly going to become reparations. This is coming. You've had CNN, the Washington Post, even the New York Times. You've had these clowns sitting here admitting that the Democrats are embracing a new definition of reparations. This is the white media giving their blessing to it. This is the white media trying to tell the public, well, reparations, if these niggers are telling you that they should get a check, reparations could be something like some tax cuts, maybe a couple of baby bonds, something like that. But actually a check? Ooh, do you think these niggers deserve a check? Reparations is not something that's supposed to be put up to any sort of public vote. It's something, this is far too important for us to leave it up to the groups who benefit from the completely lopsided racialist pyramid scheme that is American society. These other groups, they like it exactly the way that it is because black people are deliberately relegated to the bottom, and it's policy. So, of course, they have no incentive to change that. They're no more interested in having to work for their position in the society than the white majority is. And you can bet that you will be seeing the black bootlicks who have been attacking us agreeing with all of this. They'll be agreeing that, yeah, welfare, food stamps, hell, the NBA and the NFL, all of that is reparations. They're going to be amening every lying word that the white government comes up with, whatever their little reparations study says. Sure, they'll give token resistance to it, but not very much. But they're going to be agreeing with the premise that general government programs, which were for the entire society and which only a tiny handful of black people have ever been part of, somehow constitutes reparations. Now, of course, this is all a racist fraud. The word reparations comes from the root word repair. Welfare and food stamps have not repaired the damage that was done and continues to be done to us in any sense of the term. Most black people got nothing from affirmative action, but white women, who are half the white population, did. And yet we're not allowed to call affirmative action a white government program, even though 50% of the white population has benefited from it. I'm not sure how many black people in percentage terms have benefited from affirmative action, but I'm willing to bet you it's in the single digits. And NFL or NBA contracts, that's not reparations in any shape, form, or fashion. The NBA and NFL, those are private labor agreements in private sports leagues that only benefit a private handful of people. Neither the NBA nor the NFL has anything to do with the government, but you can bet that any sort of reparations study is going to have the gall to try to claim that they do. Slavery was not specific to only a handful of black people. It applied to all of us, those of us who were caught up in the slavery experience. It was not a private sector agreement. It was private sector, public sector, and everything in between. The federal government wrote laws and used their courts, their legislatures, and even their military to enforce it. The prohibition against black people in the United States voting, that didn't merely apply to just 3 or 4 black people out in Oklahoma. It applied to every single one of us. If you were black in this country, it applied to you. You couldn't vote. Didn't matter if you were a slave or a so-called free Negro. You still couldn't vote or hold public office. These were laws that were put on the books with the power and violence of the state in order to enforce it and make sure that black people didn't cross that line. These were blanket damages inflicted upon all of us. And the same people who did this and continue to do these things to us, they now want to try to get away with saying that 300 black men in a white basketball league or a white-owned football league somehow addresses the damage that was done against tens of millions of us. Hell, a sizable percentage of black people are not now and have never been on government assistance. And yet you better believe that if some sort of reparations study comes about under the current circumstances, without us putting enough pressure on these bastards that they understand not to pull the stunt, under the current circumstances, you better believe they will be dragging out every white supremacist talking point you've ever heard from the conservatives. Because these good white liberals, they're not on your side, never have been. The deflections from any white government-backed study group on reparations will also have lots of deflections and attempts to blame everyone but white people. Expect someone to throw in wording saying Africans sold Africans, etc. Why, there were some black people in the United States who allegedly owned other black people. Well, that kind of muddies the waters. That kind of nullifies it when you think about it. Keep in mind, they're not going to present any receipts of any tribes in Africa who got paid for any slaves. No agreements, no nothing. Dr. Joseph Ben Yakinen told you not to be letting white power get away with that particular line of crap, but a lot of y'all let them get away with it anyway. And on an issue like this, keep in mind, trying to deny us reparations is simply going to be the thin end of the wedge. From there, it's going to be, well, these niggers trying to pull some stunt like this, we got to put them in their place. You better believe it's only going to be step one of a renewed, hyper-aggressive offensive against us. They're going to drag out every old saw that they can. They're going to try to throw everything against the wall to see what sticks. That's the reason why you see so many of these guys doing it now. Part of the kitchen sink strategy that we see white supremacy using against us is sending out their black bootlicks to try to fool people into thinking that they're the face of this movement, whatever you want to call it. Foundational Black Americans, ADOS, survivors of slavery, whatever you want to call it. They're trying to get some of their black con men and con women to jump in front of the cameras and say, we're the leaders of this. We're speaking for this. No different than Ralph Northam when he got his 4 or 5 butter biscuit chomping morons, clergy, by the way, so-called black leaders. The white media christens them black leaders. Nobody else does, but the white media calls them that, so it must be true. And here they are saying, we ain't got no problem with that, with the Governor Northam's blackface routine. He paid us very well not to take offense to it. So that's the same thing that's going on here. And this explains why we're suddenly seeing Symone Sanders all of a sudden. By the way, do you remember how Symone Sanders even came to the public consciousness in the first place? When and how did you first hear about Symone Sanders? We started hearing about her about 3 years ago, during the Democratic presidential primaries. And what was her job? She was a communications secretary for Bernie Sanders. You know, Bernie, reparations aren't feasible, Sanders. Bernie, do you support reparations? No, Sanders. Bernie, nobody can even tell me what the reparations are. You know, it's problematic because nobody seems to really know what reparations are. And he sounded like any Archie Bunker racist you ever heard. Well, you know, these people can't seem to tell you what reparations are. That's a lie. He knows exactly what reparations are. Same thing that they were for Jews like him. He knows exactly what reparations are. As Neely Fuller said, the white supremacists play stupid, and in too many cases, black people play dumb right along with them. But Symone Sanders, it makes sense that she would be out here carrying water for white supremacy. Hell, she did it for Bernie Sanders. The crap doesn't fall far from the bull, now does it? You see, the white media is going on an all-out jihad, pushing their hand-picked sellouts to talk about reparations on TV. This is what they're attempting to do to try to figure out how to hijack this movement. Now that it's coming to the fore, it's a matter of, well, we're not going to tell people about these new voices of black media who put reparations back on the map in a big way, and we're not going to tell them that this was a direct spinoff of how the new voices of black media crushed Kamala Harris in a single 24 to 48 hour period. We're not going to say that there's some black folks out there who are flexing their muscles and that they're challenging power in a big way. We're not going to do that. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to get some of our hand-picked bootlicks, you know, some clowns who are on the payroll, and we're going to give them the script so they know what to say. And yeah, they're going to go along with it, and we'll get away with it if we can. Oh, you should expect to see all the usual suspects dragged out of mothballs. Roly-poly has already made the rounds on the Fox Business Channel of all places, where Charles Payne, I can't believe he did it with a straight face, he actually talked about Roly-poly's, saying that Roly-poly has a show, the Roland Martin Experience. I'm like, you mean that YouTube channel that nobody watches? You mean that one? I could hold a house party and get more people to show up than would show up to see Roly-poly's YouTube channel. His live stream is damn near in the double digits, if that. But nonetheless, the white media has already made it clear Roly-poly is going to be dragged out of retirement so that he can sell the soap for massa. And Symone Sanders, she's going to get out there and say, well, let me tell you who really started this reparations thing. They're going to try to manufacture a fraudulent narrative, one that puts some white media, white supremacist approved flunkies and and some of their agents at the very center of this. This is all about manufacturing a controlled debate. But first, they got to do the job of making sure that they indoctrinate people that, oh, Simone Sanders, this is who you should be listening to, and roly-poly. See, they're the ones speaking for this movement, using our talking points. They're trying to pull a con. But Angela Rye, with lettuce and tomatoes on the side, she's going to be out there. Bakari Sellout will be out there. All the usual suspects. And you should also expect to see some clowns who you haven't seen in a while. Tariq mentioned this on his recent podcast, that Simone Sanders is trying to give credit for the resurgence of reparations as an issue to some of the approved media figures at the New York Times, of all places. This is just white supremacy sending out their bootlicks. Expect to see Michael Eric Dyson and some others who will start claiming that black people need to forgive. Expect to hear that talk being thrown at us, that we're holding on to bitterness and we need to let go of the past. And then you got Mark Morial. They're just coming out across the line. And this is no accident. Don't be surprised when you see Ta-Nehisi Coates get brought back out. In fact, I think he's already had one or two of his little brain-dead chats with the white media already. The white media has spent several years trying to manufacture the lie that Ta-Nehisi Coates is the preeminent slavery expert, especially on reparations. They spent a lot of time trying to take this safe, non-threatening, boot-licking bastard and make it where apparently he's the guy we should listen to on reparations. And he's the main scumbag who said nothing when Alexandria Cortez was saying that Latinos ought to get paid for black people suffering, even though in many cases these same Hispanics were the ones who helped to carry out and enforce slavery. Take a look at what was going on in the Texas territories before the Civil War if you need confirmation of that. Better yet, take a look at Latin America. So I don't want to hear anything about any black-brown alliance. There ain't been the Latinos have been trying to keep as far away from black folks as possible. Well, on this reparations thing, you're going to stay as far away as possible. But Ta-Nehisi Coates, he didn't check Alexandria Cortez for her lie. He didn't oppose her. He didn't even comment on it. He heard, and by the way, he'll be the main one who tells you that, well, whenever these white people try to say that some indistinct policy should count as reparations, they have to know that it doesn't. Well, he had a woman who clearly identifies herself as Spanish. That means white, because she told you that she's got black ancestors, but that doesn't make me black. So this wannabe white woman sits here and says that any discussion about reparations needs to include Latinos in any sort of tangible benefits. And Ta-Nehisi Coates, who's supposed to be the expert on reparations, to hear the white media tell it, he doesn't even say boo about it. So that lets you know where he stands. And that's the whole point. The white media will present him as being the unassailable expert on reparations, so when they bring out Alexandria Cortez to say Hispanics should be getting part of this, and they bring out Elizabeth wannabe Indian Warren to say, and Native Americans too, and when they bring out people saying, what about the Cubans? And what about the Martians? And what about the one-eyed, one-horned, blind purple people eaters? And what about hunchbacks? Then he'll be sitting there saying nothing. And the image gets across, well, see, there's no resistance. See, this expert on reparations, this guy who we've been told is an expert on reparations, he isn't objecting to it, so it must be okay. This is how white supremacy gives itself permission to attack black people, by having some of their paid con men, some of their paid actors, play their role of the subservient, obedient Negro who doesn't question what white power says. Ta-Nehisi Coates is one of white supremacy's safe black radicals. He's one of the, he's a black, he's a safe one. White power tries to make him seem important when they occasionally gripe about him, but it's all a fraud, it's all pretend, it's all play acting. A little bit of political theater that they're putting on to fool you and me, but we're not fooled. The only reason that you see these chumps talking a little tough now is because we're the ones setting the tone. We swiped their non-existent cojones right out from under them. These guys are plants of white supremacy. Their power comes from white power, from the white media. Without the white media, they don't exist. So their ability to be able to lead black folks around by the nose has been severely eroded. They were not the ones who said that Kamala Harris needs to be sent packing. We said that. They were the ones out there cheerleading for Kamala Harris. They were not the ones who said that Kamala Harris is not on the side of black people. Hell, they've been the main ones saying that she is. And yet, for some damn reason, they have no influence and no stroke. They've admitted that this is coming from the internet, and that means it's coming from us because nobody else is doing this. But you better understand that what you're seeing from Simone Sanders and Roly-Poly Martin and Mark Morial and Ta-Nehisi Coates, where you got all these people who are doing everything that they can to attack us either overtly or covertly. They're doing everything that they can to either undermine the issue of reparations, or they're trying to undermine the ones who are actually bringing it. Basically, what's happening here is 50 different black bootlicks delivering the same message 50 different ways. And the message is reparations isn't a valid grievance, and even if it is, it's not necessary. And even if it's necessary, these descendants of slaves, they shouldn't want it because we're better than that. Expect to see some black clergy coming out like Michael Eric Dyson. Expect to see some black clergy coming out saying that, well, you know, at some point we need to heal. And, well, what's going to be happening afterwards? There's going to be a lot of hurt feelings. Just a couple of days, you had Jeff Bezos's Washington Post website, which really at this point needs to just change their name to Stormfront DC, because that's what they are. They published a so-called op-ed by a good white liberal called Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren are wrong. We shouldn't pay reparations for slavery. And this is supposed to be a white liberal who's trying to claim that she's thinking about the bigger picture, but the bigger picture is her just justifying everything that says that, well, slavery was wrong, but it wasn't that wrong. And then what she says is all sorts of white-splaining, like there are a lot of objections that can be raised to reparations, starting with the price tag, which would run into the trillions. Now, keep in mind, the United States has been spending trillions of dollars in 2 failed occupations in Afghanistan and Iraq, but for some damn reason, that doesn't seem to be any justification for stopping it. And she goes on to write, their descendants still live, of course, but how do you justify taking money to pay them from the descendants of immigrants who arrived long after the 13th Amendment abolished slavery? And how do you identify who exactly is entitled to payment, especially given the latter influx of immigration from Africa and the Caribbean? Now, we've already answered all this. And this Megan McArdle woman, she had to cop to that because her very next sentence was, yet these objections are addressable, not perfectly, but well enough. Oh, so in other words, they've been hearing what we've been saying. We've already spoken about that. This is about American descendants of slaves. Yes, Joy Reid, though she should never get reparations from anyone, if she wants to make a reparations argument, she needs to make a reparations argument against the Belgian government, because that's who enslaved the Congolese. And if Angela Rye, with lettuce and tomatoes on the side, wants to make a reparations argument, she needs to make a reparations argument with the Spanish, because that's who enslaved the Haitians. And the same thing goes for Roly-Poly Martin. He needs to go ahead and join her. And if Kamala Harris, if she actually does bribe some Jamaican officials to change her birth certificate and call her black, if she wants to make a reparations argument, she can make one to the British. Oh, there are lots of reparations arguments to be made for these people. They just can't make them in the United States because that's not where their enslavement happened. Now, this Megan McArdle woman, she eventually gets to the main point that she wanted to make. And keep in mind, this is supposed to be what qualifies as a mainstream news outlet. And here's what she wrote. The biggest problem is the sociological one. How do we pay reparations and still call ourselves one nation? Now, when the Japanese were paid reparations for their internment at Manzanar and a couple other places, nobody was saying this. When the Native Americans were paid reparations and still get reparations, nobody, and keep in mind, the Native Americans live on reservations, which means that these are supposed to be their own little quasi-autonomous mini-states. That's what a reservation is supposed to be. It's supposed to be quasi-autonomous. And yet nobody says, hey, the very idea of reservations where these people can kick you out and you don't have free passage like you do through the states, how can we do that and still call ourselves one nation? We have set aside pieces of land for people based on their ethnicity for some historical wrong, and we're paying them millions of dollars and they live tax free. How can we do this and call ourselves one nation? Nobody was saying that about the Native Americans. See, when it comes to non-black groups, nobody ever says that this is divisive. Nobody ever says that this would fracture the nation. How can we do that and call ourselves one nation? That never happens until black people show up. When black people show up, all of a sudden, well, think about the price tag and how can we do that and still call ourselves one nation? In other words, what they're really scared of is the America that has the firmly fixed racial stratification in place, that everybody is in their place, locked into their place in society and can't get out. How are we going to maintain that? Because that's what it really means. When they say one nation, what they really mean is one white ethno-state. How do we pay reparations and still call the United States a white ethno-state? That's what it means. And the white media message is one that they want to take hold in the public consciousness. So they're carpet bombing the airwaves, the radio, and the internet with this day and night, night and day. As far as they're concerned, we couldn't stop a major party candidate from getting crushed by all of these ex-American slaves here. So what we're going to do now is since black people have lost their fear of bringing up reparations, that's what the problem is. You and I have shown that we're not scared to bring this up. Well, MSNBC has gone public with this poll, this Marist poll from 2 years ago, saying reparations for slavery. 68% of people polled by Marist said that they didn't believe that America should pay the descendants of slaves for anything that happened in slavery. Now, as I pointed out on my Twitter feed, that's not new at all. All you got to do is go back to some Gallup polls back in the 1960s, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had a 63% unfavorable rating according to a Gallup poll. And keep in mind, that's worse than Donald Trump. Donald Trump is held in higher esteem than Dr. King was back when he was alive. And before that, in 1961, you had a poll conducted by the Gallup organization, reported by the Washington Post back in the 1960s. Americans were asked, do you approve or disapprove of the Freedom Riders? 61% said disapprove. So when it comes to black people, of course you're going to have 3/5 to 2/3 sitting there saying we don't like it. Anything that's good for black people, we hate it. Of course that's going to happen. That's par for the course. Ain't nothing new about that. That's average. That's what we expect. But the white media doesn't educate people about that. The white media doesn't point that out. Because if you do, then it also becomes, oh, so we can ignore this because obviously they're on the wrong side of history. But the white media is not trying to push that narrative. They want to push the narrative of, well, it's unpopular, so you're going to face maximum resistance. They're trying to embolden the white supremacists. The white media is not using dog whistles. They're using foghorns. This is them trying to get the white folks and all these other non-black groups on code. Hey, these niggers, we need to let them know the whole nation's against you. What else is new? So they're going to be carpet bombing everybody with all of their lies, all of their talking points, all of their paid black bootlicks to create the narrative. Right now we're at the stage of manufacturing false black mouthpieces for this. That's the stage that we're at right now. The black mouthpieces who are trying to present themselves as being the spokespeople for reparations, or to present themselves as being the media voice for reparations. They're going to be the main ones who the white media publicizes and pushes and promotes on their airwaves. That's the stage we're at right now. We want the public to see Roly-Poly and Simone Sanders and think, okay, so they got the pulse of what these black reparation demands are about. And they're going to let us know what it is, whether or not we've satisfied these demands. And that's what the white media is setting them up for. They're being positioned to serve that purpose. The white media is about to put on yet another masterpiece of fraudulent, racist political theater, and it's going to be starring their black bootlicks who are going to be pretending and calling themselves speaking for you and me. Dr. Noam Chomsky gave the many means that the white media uses to control the public discourse, emphasis and tone, selecting only certain topics to discuss. But as Dr. Chomsky pointed out, the primary means of controlling the public discourse are limited because many times the public will demand that certain issues be addressed no matter what official power thinks, and the white media won't be able to contain the public discontent. So what the white media will use, their primary means of controlling the public opinion, the bounding of debate. Whenever they're forced by circumstance or public outrage to discuss something that they don't want to discuss, the white media sets up phony debates between someone who represents the establishment position, which is the white media's position, and some secondary party who pretends to be in opposition, but the opposition, quote unquote, is almost always only a hair away from being the establishment position. For example, you never get an anti-war position from the white media. Never. They've never been anti-war on anything. The white media never opposes any military aggression by the U.S. The only positions that they ever show are someone who demands total invasion and takeover of a foreign country versus some weak, milquetoast, vacillating chump who advocates for more sanctions at most. Which is always a precursor to war, by the way. Whenever someone says sanctions, sanctions are a step away from war because that's how it works. Sanctions are meant to be basically, if we're not going to shoot at you, at the very least, we're going to try to strangle you out of existence. You see what sanctions do to countries like Iraq. You had something like allegedly 500,000 children under the age of 12 or something like that, who died due to the U.S.'s strangulation of Iraq with sanctions from 1991 until 2002. That's what sanctions do. Sanctions kill. And yet the white media will have it where you got one war hawk and you got one person saying sanctions. These become distinctions without a difference because both of them are on the same timeline of steps to war. If you look at how a nation goes to war, especially the United States, if you look at the procedure for it, sanctions are the step right before war. And that's meant to prepare the public mind. So that if you say, well, I didn't advocate launching missiles, I didn't advocate shooting bullets. Yeah, you just said oil up your guns, we're about to start shooting the bullets. Because that's what sanctions mean in a practical context, and it's the practical context that matters. Kamala Harris can try to call welfare and food stamps or her pathetic LIFT program, she can try to call that helping black people all she wants. That may be her technical definition, but the practical definition is we're going to maintain that economic divide between black people and the rest of society at all costs. That's the practical definition. We're still maintaining the divide. Because when going back to the whole war thing, when the sanctions don't work, because sanctions never do, you can always come back later and say, well, now that we've satisfied any of you people out there who were saying no war, you see, we have to go to war because your sanctions don't work. We've always had sanctions on Cuba and it hasn't worked, so we have to invade. That's where the Bay of Pigs came from. Hey, we put sanctions on Saddam Hussein and that didn't work, so we had to invade. That's where George Bush's administration, with their infamous speech, A Decade of Defiance, that's what they were saying. Hey, we've had sanctions on Venezuela and that hasn't worked, so we're within our bounds to send in the Marines. We've tried sanctions and, well, it's failed to dislodge this dictator. Look at all the suffering on the ground. Well, the suffering is because of your sanctions. Well, we wouldn't have to have sanctions if this guy would just give us his oil. So understand that sanctions, when mentioned by the white media, is not an anti-war position. It is a white media narrative, one that's meant to set up the predictable argument that we tried doing things peacefully and now we're out of options. When the truth of the matter is you got a whole constellation of options in front of you. The white media just simply makes it where either it's we're going to war or we're getting ready to go to war. Those become the two options. With the white media, there is never a narrative of we were going to go to war, but non-military action, diplomacy, withdrawal of sanctions is the right way to go. Let's use political pressure. Let's use the consensus of the international community. But we can't have military action. That's never the white media narrative. It's either we're going to war or getting ready to. The white media has a clear and open bias. They're horribly prejudiced, and it shows. On every single issue, it's obvious what the white media's position is because these are the white media's default positions. They always side with official power, with corporate power. Even when they pretend to be confronting a corporation, like say after an oil spill or some other corporate criminality, the white media always treats the corporation with velvet gloves. And who is it that the white media has on the few occasions that they discuss a corporation? They bring on some PR shill or some corporate lawyer or some quote-unquote industry spokesman. They don't bring on the company heads to grill them. The questions are always cordial and polite, and they limit the discussion to whatever the immediate issue is. They never, ever go beyond the most narrow of boundaries. When you're talking to a corporation, it has to be about whatever the alleged wrongdoing is, and only in small terms. You better not talk about a culture of corporate corruption. That you cannot do. You never get to open it up to a larger discussion. See, when you talk about Freddie Gray, if you can't find any dirt on Freddie Gray, you got to find some on his mother. And the issue is going to be about what dirt can we find to justify him being killed? Oh, we couldn't find anything on him. What about his mother? If we can't say that he's a bad guy, let's say that his mother's a bad person. When the white media does some little bit of image rehabilitation for some white corporation who finds themselves in a bit of a PR pickle, the white media never does a rundown of a corporation's history of crimes. They never give the corporations the Eric Garner treatment. They never give them the Walter Scott treatment. They never sit there and try to figure out what kind of dirt can we use to show what evil wretches you guys are. We're going to give people your entire rap sheet. They never do that with some corporation, and they never do it with the police. So while the white media will question a corporation about something, they never confront them. On police shootings, they always interrogate the survivors of police violence. They never interrogate the police or point out institutional police corruption. They never say, hey, how many times has your department been cited by the Department of Justice for civil rights violations? How many of your officers had to be charged or indicted for racial profiling or police brutality? They never ever do that. These are not news segments, they're one-on-one press conferences. The white media is never adversarial toward established white power. When the white media is opposed to you, they make sure you know it. They make sure that it's the anchor or the host of the show and they're coming at you. They make sure that you know that they're opposed to you. They hurl a nonstop barrage of accusations, innuendo, and outright lies at whomever it is that they don't like, because they want the public to know that this is somebody or this is a group who the white media doesn't approve of. And black people in our interests, we are always at the top of the white media's hit list. The white media's job is not to report the public's opinion, it is to dictate the public's opinion to it. The billionaires who own and run the white media, they're the same guys, the exact same guys who benefit from white supremacy's domestic and global policies of genocide and theft. The white media's purpose is not to publicize a true conversation of the issues. Their job is to manufacture a phony sock puppet stage show that pretends to be about the issues. On the rare occasion that they have on someone who actually does tell the truth, the white media makes sure not to bring that person back on again. This strategy to limit what viewpoints are shown to the public, that's a technique of mind control. Because by censoring certain viewpoints, it gets across the unspoken message that these views don't get discussed because they're fringe, they're out of the mainstream. And you see, for the longest time, the public, before the internet, we were separated from one another. So we didn't know that we were actually the majority, or at the very least, that our viewpoints were not fringe at all. And not merely because our viewpoints may be in the majority, but also because of the fact that the people who would try to give us the impression that our views are somehow fringe, they can't defend that lie whenever they get confronted on it. Whenever we present our position, then all of a sudden, well, you can't call it fringe anymore. So that's the reason why they call it fringe. They were getting away with it because you and I were not able to communicate. We weren't able to organize. And because you're isolated, the media's controlled by people who are opposed to you and telling lies that your position, what you know to be true, well, it ain't true at all. It's just you. You start thinking that, well, maybe it's just me, so maybe I shouldn't say it too loudly because I don't want anyone to think that I'm a kook. But nah, black folks some of us are starting to discover our backbone. Well, reparations, that would be divisive. Isn't that what old Bernie the bigot said? Well, black folks are like, well, hell, you just gonna have to hate us then. And the Washington Post sitting there saying, how do we pay reparations and still call ourselves one nation? This ain't about one nation. It ain't one nation. Maybe that's what we need. We need to understand that it ain't one nation. And maybe by paying reparations afterwards, everybody can see what it feels like to go, man, the very next day, these black folks, they got caked off and they just said to hell with the rest of you. Yeah, you get to see what it's like to be in our shoes for a change. Maybe it's time for some real sensitivity training. You get to see what it's like to be us. You want to know what you call that? You call that justice. But that's not what the white media is trying to promote. Instead, what they're trying to do is to set up a cute little bit of political theater that's supposed to neutralize the debate altogether, to neutralize the discussion by already having a pre-planned end to it. It's going to end with some of their black bootlicks saying, yep, welfare, food stamps, and Kamala Harris just got through talking about some Lyft program. There your reparations right there. That's your reparations right there. The white media's censorship of certain viewpoints that are not the viewpoints of official white power, it's meant to create the misimpression that these views aren't mainstream, quote unquote. But who is it who defines what is the mainstream? The white media does. The white media's editors, producers, anchors, and most of all, their corporate shareholders and sponsors. By shareholders, I'm talking about the big ones like Sumner Redstone, not your grandma who has a couple of shares in her mutual fund. I ain't talking about that. But the guys who really matter, they're the ones who decide what's acceptable and what's not. And mainstream, you would think with a term like that, you would think that it would be whatever the majority of the population wants and favors and believes. And you would think that that's what mainstream means. Well, that is what mainstream means to you and me. But to the white men, and especially the white media, it has nothing to do with the public will at all. Mainstream doesn't have anything to do with what the majority thinks. In fact, 90% of the time, the public will is precisely what the white media wants to define as being out of the mainstream. The public wants to see their opinion and their viewpoints reflected in the media, particularly the news, but the white media is about promoting the interests of established white power, which is diametrically opposed to any expressions of public will. So the last thing the white media wants is to give a platform to the public. They instead put on a phony baloney bit of political theater. This is why the crossfire point and counterpoint argument format is so popular with the white media. They get two people who mostly agree with one another on everything, and they get to have some nonsensical shouting match over which words they ought to use. That's basically what these phony debates come down to. It's supposed to be cathartic for the public. You got somebody who claims to be taking one side and someone else who claims to be taking the other, and the public gets to feel that, oh, there's some real argument going on. It means nothing. No one ever challenges a policy. They instead bicker about what the intent is and whether someone is nice enough or patriotic enough or informed enough, but nobody ever actually challenges policy. Go back and watch your debates. What you'll see is the people never actually challenge these things. The most effective use of controlled opposition is the setting up of fake debates. White power will have their hand-picked phony opposition mouthpiece pretending to debate white supremacy's real advocate. And the phony opposition's position will be white supremacy in all but name, and then they'll tell us that this is a real debate, when it's nothing more than a media fraud. This is the means by which white power, using their media, tries to get away with giving themselves permission to deny giving black people the justice that we have been owed for far too long. This is the means by which they give themselves permission to go to war. They give themselves permission to ignore what are supposed to be their own laws. So, what is the response of those of us who are the survivors of slavery to be to all this? First of all, We have got to decide to up our level of aggression here. We have been far too docile, far too passive. We have got to invade the white media's realm. We have got to get in the faces of the candidates. They're using their white media to miseducate the public and spread misinformation. We're going to make it where it's impossible for them to do so. The same way that people were trying to crash the party on Donald Trump. Well, here's a real party you need to be crashing. We need to be getting in the faces of the white media, their black bootlicks. Yeah, you want to hold up a camera and confront Bernie Sanders? Great, keep that up. That's the right thing to do. You should do that. And you should also make sure that you go ahead and do a cell phone ambush on Roly-Poly Martin and Simone Sanders. Make sure you go up to them and remind them how they carry water for white supremacy and how they were attacking and excoriating and demonizing those of us who are the new voices of black media. We're the ones who brought reparations to the surface, not him, not the black bootlicks. Pressure needs to be applied across the board that we need to put them on Front Street so we can invalidate them. These guys have no place in this discussion. They are the allies of white supremacy. Hell, on the plantation, these were the house Negroes. That's the reason why. An in-house studio, and here in the studio, in-house, yeah, in-house, you got your house Negroes in the studio. That's what you got. We got to stop being bashful about that. We know where these guys like to do their broadcast at. Time to knock on the door and say, hey, you're answering the door whether you want to or not. We are here to make sure you don't get away with this propaganda. Make it clear that we will dominate this discussion and that the white media is not going to get away with trying to declare that the white racists are going to decide what reparations are and who it applies to and what it should consist of. The Washington establishment their white media trying to declare that Democrats are attempting to figure out what reparations would be. Democrats do not determine what reparations are. It is not their right nor their prerogative to determine that, and the white media is not going to be allowed to bestow that ability onto them. They don't get to determine that. Of course, Simone Sanders is going to lie for them. That's why she worked for Bernie the Bigot's campaign. She was fuming like a crackhead going through withdrawals when she saw how fast we crushed Kamala Harris. She was losing her crap online. It was amusing and pathetic to see. She's part of the white media, and they need people to believe that only they wield this kind of power, the kind of power that we showed to crush a candidate overnight. The white media was looking at that and going, God dang, how come we can't do that? It's because the white media don't speak for the streets. We do. And the white media is worried. No matter what you may try to tell yourself, the white media is not some autonomous group. They have power that they have to answer to. There are people in power who the white media has to give an accounting of themselves to because they don't exist just to exist. They exist to promote the interest of white supremacy. And they have to justify their existence. How effectively are you able to corral the public will? How effectively are you able to shut down the public discontent? How quickly are you able to get rid of the viewpoints that we don't like and to crush those kind of public discourse? How good are you at that? If you are, then white power wants you on the payroll because you're an effective tool. But on the other hand, if you just can't control public discourse and you got all these black people who are speaking out of turn and you can't shut them down and you can't get them off these issues, well, who the hell needs a white media propaganda mill whose propaganda is useless? The white media has to prove that they can still control the public mind. When we crushed Kamala, that was then followed up with the candidates being scared witless. They were having to answer questions about a black agenda because we put pressure on the black bootlicks. The black bootlicks had a stark demonstration that here they were kissing Kamala Harris's behind, and the new voices of black media online said, cancel this heifer, and the black masses moved. That's the reason why you got the breakfast schlubs all of a sudden trying to talk like us, and why you got Roly-Poly Martin doing that, because they understand that we are the ones who speak for the black consensus. We are the ones who reflect real black sentiment, and that when we speak, stuff happens. Oh yeah, Roly-Poly talks all the time, not that anyone listens, which explains why when he talks, nothing happens. And so these black bootlicks, they saw how they were forced to have to talk like us, and the candidates were just to remain relevant. That's what it is. The black bootlicks are not there simply to be there. White power looks at them the same way that they look at their white media operations. You Negroes, you have to show that you can corral black opinion, that you can control the black discourse, that you can control the black public mind. Wait a minute, Kamala Harris just got crushed. You guys are so far behind the curve, it ain't funny. Well, we better appropriate some of the language we hear from these new voices online. We better do it quick. What about a black agenda? What about a black agenda? And as soon as they brought that up, just the very fact that they even used our words was so damning. Because when you use our words, you're creating a noose around the neck of these white supremacists that they can't get out of. Next thing you know, inevitably the word reparations came up. But that's because we forced these black bootlicks to do it. You guys forced them to do it. They had to do it, or they had to become completely and thoroughly irrelevant. And when an issue as significant and threatening as reparations explodes on the internet and the candidates find themselves scrambling to say something because they're all scared that the same people who crushed Kamala Harris like the worm she is are going to come and wreck their campaigns next, and they're forced to say the word reparations, that's very threatening to official power. As Neely Fuller said, white supremacy prides itself on being able to control both sides of the conversation. They totally lost control of this side of the discussion, and now half of the white media and their flunkies are in a panic, and the other half are in total denial. This is part of the white media's damage control. When some issue sneaks up on them and knocks them over the head, they have to try to make it seem like it was really all their idea. Yeah, this reparations thing, it was all our doing. See, we're still in total control. That's what Simone Sanders was trying to pull with that little lie that she was telling. Trying to claim the New York Times was behind bringing reparations to the surface. She's trying to reassure her white paymasters that she's still in control, so of course she's going to credit the white media with making reparations an issue when she knows it was the same people who crushed her would-be employer Kamala Harris's campaign. We've made a major party candidate irrelevant. No need to say that we made Simone Sanders irrelevant. We relegated her and a lot of the white media's black bootlicks to obscurity a while back. Simone Sanders is not going to get the stench of her anti-black male hatred off of her. The same way that Kamala Harris's record, her reprehensible record, follows her, it's following Simone Sanders too. She's not going to get rid of it. Bernie Sanders is a dyed-in-the-wool anti-black racist, and you didn't have to wait until the 2016 presidential race to find that out either. And for Simone Sanders to have fought for 2 years or more to trick black people into voting for him, that proves that she's an anti-black racist as well. After he stood in front of a black audience and dared to say that reparations are unfeasible, as far as any sane person should be concerned, Bernie Sanders' name is forever cemented in the halls of infamy forever. You can mention Bernie Sanders in the same sentence that you mention David Duke. Bernie Sanders belongs in the same company as George Wallace and Lincoln Rockwell and Strom Thurmond. And I don't give a damn how many washed-up rappers that he has vouching for him, or how many of these bougie bootlicks work for him. No black person can say with a straight face that Bernie Sanders has not been one of our most vicious and vile opponents. And for the same Simone Sanders, who hasn't said a single solitary word about Bernie the bigot's flat-out refusal to support reparations, to call herself speaking on it, that's an abomination. And before some of you undercover shea butter bootlicks try to tell me in the comment section that, well, Simone, she has said some critical stuff about Bernie. Let me tell you something. Simone Sanders is desperately hoping that she can get a job in the imaginary Kamala Harris administration, but she ain't going against Bernie. She has a couple of very mild pseudo critiques, but it's obvious that she's hedging her bets. She's keeping her options open. So now that Kamala Harris has been crushed, Simone Sanders is now looking and going, how do I transition to Bernie? Because he raised more money in a day than Kamala Harris did. And well, obviously his campaign is going to get a lot farther than hers. Hey, maybe I can get my old job back. That's what she's thinking. Simone Sanders, like Roly-Poly and Mark the Moron Morial, has received her marching orders from her white paymasters. All of these guys are helping to forward a strategy that's meant to confuse us, if not the public at large. Since reparations is so big an issue that it simply cannot be ignored, the white media is going to bring on some of their black bootlicks who will then portray themselves as being in favor of reparations. Notice my wording. I didn't say that these black bootlicks would declare themselves in favor of reparations. I said they would portray themselves as being in favor of reparations. Tell me, have you ever heard Roly-Poly or Simone Sanders or Angela Rye or any of these black bootlicks you've seen on TV get in front of white folks and actually demand reparations? See, there's a big difference between speaking of reparations as a hypothetical, being supportive in the abstract, and then saying, here's the check that y'all need to be cutting for us. And no, we're not going to a commercial break. Reparations are overdue, and none of these candidates for the Democrats are relevant or viable. None of them are legitimate unless they're talking about reparations. You're not going to be hearing these black bootlicks talking like that. They're not going to actually be advocating reparations. They're simply going to be saying, well, let us in the abstract present the pros of reparations. It's not even the pros of reparations. It's just basically some lukewarm, warmed over, stale talking points about, well, slavery hurt black folks. No kidding. Even Republicans will cop to that one because they can't deny it. But these black bootlicks, they're not actually advocating for reparations. They're simply portraying themselves as being in support of it. Fox News brought Roly-Poly on to talk about reparations. And these are the word games that these bastards play, like Kamala Harris saying that she's in favor of reparations, but when you press her on it, she gets mad and says, I'm not going to say I'm going to do something that's only going to benefit black people. All of these individual black bootlicks you see who are either attacking us or trying to palm themselves off as being the voices of this movement or talking about reparations without actually demanding it, they are all cogs in a white media machine. They are all soldiers playing out their part in this white media offensive. Each one helping to push a specific agenda, which is to derail the whole reparations issue by any means possible. Go ahead and say that all sorts of meaningless, irrelevant general government programs are reparations. Say that reparations is going to be divisive and we can't call ourselves one nation. Oh, them white folks, they gonna get mad. Or say that it's a Russian plot, you see. That's where Malcolm Nance and Mark the Moron Morial come in, trying to call it a Russian plot. And you see Simone Sanders waddling her traitorous behind out. That's doubly sickening. Not only is she still doing her white master's dirty work and attempting to legitimize some white media flunkies as being the ones behind this movement, she's also laying the groundwork to deny what reparations truly are. You better believe that a shea butter feminut like Simone Sanders is going to be merely, if you ask her, well, what counts as reparations to you? What are reparations to you, Simone Sanders? You know what she's going to say. You'll find her on television or being quoted in some online article somewhere saying, reparations would be gender studies programs so we can fight the black male patriarchy in the black community. And that's a far bigger problem than white racism. Do you know how many black women are killed by their black male significant others? She'll be talking just like Jamila LaPuke and Amber Phillips. Or she'll be saying that reparations would be increased LGBT awareness because the black community is the most homophobic in America. Do you know how many black, gay, and trans people commit suicide because the black community refuses to embrace them? You better believe she'll be trotting out that garbage before it's all over. And while Simone Sanders didn't go to an HBCU, that doesn't matter. Kamala Harris didn't grow up in Oakland either, and she's not black, but that doesn't stop her from trying to claim both. But you better believe Simone Sanders, she'll be out there saying, well, we need more money for these HBCUs because education is important. They are agents of white supremacy, and white supremacy is a con, so of course they're going to be full of lies. White power couldn't stop us from asserting ourselves. They see that we've lost our fear of their criticism because a critical mass of black people have been sufficiently emboldened by the new voices of black media. You guys know that you're not alone. You know that what you've been thinking and what you've been saying all these years, if not decades, it hasn't just been some kook weirdos saying it. You have been the sentiment of the vast majority of black people in this country. You guys now know that. And because of that, you've discovered your freaking backbone. Yeah, we're going to get criticized, but we now know what the white media's playbook is. So their criticism does not disturb us or bother us. You've had enough people now who have talked to you long enough and helped you get your mind right. When the white media, normally what they would do is to stop a movement like this, normally they would buy off the leaders of this or that ADOS movement because too many times there were black folks who were looking for white power to put them on the payroll. But that's not going to be possible this time because this movement is leaderless. And by this movement, what I'm talking about is this black empowerment movement. Yeah, to say that the descendants of slaves are populating the movement, that tells you who the movement consists of. But that doesn't tell you what the movement's about. ADOS happens to simply define who it is you're talking about, but it doesn't tell you what that group's fighting for. It doesn't tell you, that's not a movement. That's simply a population. It's what it is that we're fighting for. Tangibles. Now that tells you, that's a movement. That tells you what we're fighting for. We have well-defined interests that we're dedicated to protecting and promoting, but there is no one person or even one group who is giving us marching orders. The agenda is our leader. Now, as the white media sees it, the fact that this movement is leaderless, to them, they look and say, okay, while it does mean that we can't kill, coerce, bribe, or buy off the leaders of the movement, well, the thing is, because there's no leader for this movement, that means that any old fool can come along and claim to be leading it. As far as the white media is concerned, they think that this potentially is going to be an opening for them. They can just get one of their black bootlicks who's on the payroll to spout some of our talking points to try to sound like us. It didn't work with DeRay McKesson, but you know, the white media is out of tricks. This is the only trick that they got. So they got to use this whether they like it or not because they don't have any other cards to play. Most people don't think for themselves. They get most of their information from the very white media propaganda outlets who they know are lying to them. And they're so intellectually lazy that they tell themselves that what the white media says is basically true. So that's why the white media feels like they could probably get away with this. Of course, we're not the true audience for the white media's attempt to redefine reparations. The real audience happens to be the non-black majority of the population. And the white media is attempting to feed them their talking points and to justify their continued economic and political aggression against us. Whether or not the white media will be successful is going to depend entirely on how hard we push back. We have our enemies attempting to use their media monopoly in order to manufacture a phony dialogue, one that is meant to exonerate them of their sins, one that's meant to say, oh, we're closing the chapter on reparations, and hey, we got some black folks who stand in front of the camera and say that it's an issue that's gone away. Now, of course, they can try that, but we're just going to come back the next day and say, well, now we're going to raise more political hell. So they're stuck on the horns of a dilemma. Sure, they have the ability to put some black bootlicks in front of a camera and say, well, you know, we are the leaders of black folks and we're declaring that reparations is a dead issue. These white folks, they have paid for their sins. This white government has been forgiven of their sins. That's what they did with freaking Ralph Northam in Virginia. That's what the white media is showing you how bold they are about this. Yeah, we'll go ahead and get some bought and paid for bootlicks and stand in front of a camera, and we'll see if that fools anyone. they're trying the exact same thing now. And instead of having all of their bootlicks stand in front of some courthouse, now they got their bootlicks across the country standing in front of cameras. They will use their advocates to push their agenda and then have some phony bootlick pretending to be us. The two sock puppets will, of course, agree that nothing is to be done on the issue, and the white media is going to make a huge show out of pointing and saying, see, those black leaders said that black people don't need reparations. And they also said that that whole descendants of slaves thing is bogus, and that they're just a bunch of hateful people who won't let go of the past, and they're divisive, and the society is better than this. And while the public may know that what they're seeing is largely a fraud, the sad truth is most of the society is in agreement in maintaining the racist pecking order, the pecking order that we're trying to destroy. Now, we can beat these guys, but we have to be honest. They would love nothing more than to give themselves permission to hold on to the wealth that they stole from us. They don't need a reason to continue being racist towards us. All they need is just an opportunity, which the white media is attempting to manufacture for them. We need to be honest about what it is that we're up against. This is not going to be a single battle that gets concluded by 2020. This is an economic and political war. The white media and the white government certainly see it in those terms, and as with all wars, the bad guys are attempting to use propaganda to deceive the people about what's really going on. Now, here's the good news. If we lean on the bastards hard as we possibly can, if we keep up the pressure on them, and if we are relentless, we can break them to our will. The bad news? This ain't gonna be quick or easy, folks. This is going to be the new normal, by the way. The people who get what they want, they stay on the grind about it. The people who get what they want, they don't just hit it hard for a couple of hours and then go take a siesta. They understand that this is going to be the new normal. White supremacy is not going to be relinquishing its position in the world without a fight. And the fight's going to be a hard one and a vicious one, full of all sorts of dirty tricks and outright violent, vicious, reprehensible moves. This is a blood sport, folks. You need to get that through your head. You are not going to be having some one-and-done fight. This is going to be the new normal. Now, will it get less difficult? In some ways, over time it will, but that ain't going to be for a good while yet. And by good while, I'm talking about 20, 25 years. You know, it's amazing when Steve Bannon talks about the Republican Party being reformed over the course of 20 years. That doesn't seem to be so strange to him, and he came from Goldman Sachs. He said Donald Trump is just the first step on a road. And that tells you what the hell Steve Bannon wants. As far as he's concerned, Donald Trump, that's just the beginning. We want more than this. You want more than a mouth-frothing white supremacist? Damn right he does. That lets you know where Steve Bannon stands. Where the hell do you stand? The bad guys know that what we want is our power, and they're hell-bound to keep it from us. And we have got to decide that being adamant and aggressive and uncompromising about our tangibles, about our power, that this is going to be a daily thing for us. Every day it's going to be, I got to get out there and put my fist to the grindstone. I got to get out there and grab these scumbags by the neck, by the scruff of the neck, and let them know, tangibles, the rent's due, pay up, the rent's due. That's what we got to be stepping to these folks about, and let them know that we have the power to invalidate your election system. We have the power to do that. We're not afraid to use it. Now, what it is that we're attempting to undertake, it's going to be the hardest thing that we've ever done, and we need to be honest with ourselves about that. Because for so long, we have practiced outsourcing our empowerment, outsourcing who speaks for us. Worst of all, we outsource those essential functions to our oppressors. We're in the process of taking all of that back, but the bad guys understand what it is that we're trying to do, and that if we're successful, they're finished. This is a full court press that we see the white media attempting to pull. They're trying to redefine reparations as being something for everyone. Redefine reparations as being, at most, only about $100 billion. Ain't that what Marianne Williamson was saying? $100 billion. They're already attempting to contaminate the debate with an artificial ceiling. Let's go ahead and establish that even if we lose this idea of black people getting a check, well, it ain't going to be more than $100 billion. And don't expect it all at once, and don't expect it up front, and don't expect us to give it to you consistently. That's what they're trying to say. We're just going to say $100 billion total. Here's some government programs that everyone will have access to because Kamala Harris will still be in Congress. She'll still be in the Senate. And saying, well, it needs to be for everyone. We shouldn't be doing something just for black people. Don't be surprised when you see her standing in front of Congress after she finally bows out of the presidential race, when she finally gives up the ghost. Don't be surprised when she and Barack Obama are standing in front of the white media and saying, well, we as Congress, we represent all the people and we can't do something that's just for black people. Don't think she's going to give that line up. She's being dead serious. That is not just her saying that because she's trying to move to the center for a presidential race. She, just like Barack Obama before her, she's telling you what she believes. Whether she's in the White House or whether she's in the Capitol building, that's what she believes. Okay, fine. And our job is to make these bastards pay a price for that kind of anti-black aggression. They got the white media telling the public that Democrats like Kamala Harris and Bernie Sanders and Nancy Pelosi are trying to figure out what reparations would be. Well, Kamala Harris has gone on the record saying she's not doing anything just for black people. Bernie Sanders went farther than that. He gave a flat out no to reparations altogether. And this is who Fortune magazine's online says is declaring that they're trying to decide what reparations are. Well, hell, they've already figured it out. And they're completely opposed to it, which of course is the entire point. Black descendants of slavery raise the issue of when our enemies when they're unable to bury or ignore the issue, they then appoint themselves the arbiters of what's to be done. We got to get bold about elbowing our way into every point of this discussion, into every point of the process. We got to make it a point that it's not legitimate unless we are in the room and the white media doesn't get to decide which ones of us it should be. If there is any discussion about a study of reparations, it is not legitimate unless we are the ones conducting that study. Bringing in some white think tank and claiming, well, these guys are the experts on these kind of anthropological and sociological and demographical issues, that ain't gonna cut it. You ain't getting away with no sleight of hand, with any verbal games. You ain't getting away with that. This is about us dictating and spelling out terms. You would never have any issue regarding reparations for Jews without the Jews being the ones who would be heading up any sort of study. And as black people, we got to make it known, unless we're the ones heading up any sort of examination of this issue, it's not legitimate. We are going to be in charge of this from top to bottom, beginning to end. Attacking white supremacy, that's what we're going to be doing through this. The survivors of American slavery are asserting themselves, and we're attacking the very system that's been attacking us for centuries. And if they can't stop us, they know that this defiance of official white power is going to spread. Other groups, not just in this country, but around the world, they watch us. And as they always do, they take their cues from us because when we stand in our own power, what we do works. The Palestinians have been dropping bombs on Israel and taking their soldiers hostage, and it ain't moved the needle. It meant nothing. They've been doing it for almost 3/4 of a century now, and it's not accomplished anything for them. But in only a couple of years, they used the strategy that we employed against the Dutch occupation regime in South Africa. The Dutch occupation dictatorship is what they were. And what a surprise, Israel's quaking in their boots. They're saying this is the biggest threat we've ever faced, bigger than the Arab militaries, because Israel, thanks to the United States, has a technical and strategic edge over the Arabs, and with their nuclear weapons, well, that's the end of that. But they're looking at this and going, wait a minute, this is an external threat. This ain't about the Gaza Strip, this is about the rest of the world isolating Israel. And what comes next is sanctions. They know that that's what comes next. Boycott has already been done. Divestment has been done. Only thing left are sanctions, and I've already explained to you what sanctions are now, haven't I? So the Arabs, they're using our strategies to great effect. These same Arabs who come over here and talk to us like dogs and treat us like garbage, and yet when it comes time for them to take on their enemies, we're the ones whose playbook they're crib noting. Attacking white supremacy is something that they don't want to see become habit forming. What you've seen from these white supremacist politicians and their black bootlicks in the media, this is not merely a case of them running around like chickens with their heads cut off. Yes, they are in a panic, but that's not to say that they're not trying to pull something anyway. What we have seen the last few days on the issue of reparations in the white media, this is not merely white power launching a broadside against us. This is an entire broadside of broadsides. You can tell that the left-wing white supremacists have been sending out the emails, faxes, and memos because all their flunkies have been jumping on this one. You can just look at the headlines, look at the talking points. They're all on code. Obviously, the DNC, like they did with Black Lives Matter, they've been sending out the memos saying, okay, here's what you say and here's what you better not say. And notice that the white media line has not been that reparations aren't deserved. Even the white supremacist Washington Post, they didn't say that reparations weren't deserved. Instead, they try to dress it up in some pseudo-liberal pap about, well, we don't want to fracture the nation. And well, when you think, and if you read the article, she tries to, this Megan McArdle woman, she tries to pretty it up by in the end, basically saying that you're going to apologize by allowing African Americans to sign up for your universal child care program along with everyone else? That trivializes one of the most monumental injustices in human history. Along the way, it also erodes the common bond that should entitle African Americans to far more than they have ever gotten simply because they are Americans and this is America and we can do better. Let me tell you something. That kind of crap talk, that's exactly out of the Barack Obama playbook. There is no black America. There is no white America. Just the United States of America. She says this is America and we can do better. No, it is precisely because this is the United States that things have not been better. They haven't done any better. This is the best that the United States can do. So that's the reason why we are trying to break the paradigm. Oh, how can we give black people reparations and still call ourselves one nation? This ain't about preserving the white supremacist ethno-state. This is about breaking it. So yeah, we're trying to bring this thing down. We're not trying to preserve the United States of America. We are trying to break it. Because it needs to be broken. Any evil system like this needs to be broken. But that ain't the conversation that we're having yet. Even the white supremacists on Fox News, nobody's questioning that reparations are deserved. In fact, you haven't even been seeing them trying to come out with the reparations are a kook fringe demand. They tried that a while back and it failed. The line instead is that the Democratic Party leaders, we should leave it to them to decide what's to be done about this. Yeah, so we're going to let one of white supremacy's left-wing arm, we're going to allow them to figure this out. Yeah, Bernie Sanders, that's the guy who you want to be in charge of determining reparations. The guy who said, no, I don't support it. We have got to step up our efforts to housebreak the white media and their black bootlicks. We need to make it a point to confront them on the campaign trail, in the television studios, on the street, anywhere and everywhere. We can't let them create a media bubble that they can hide inside of and then throw all kinds of lies and misdirections out at the rest of us all the time. We have to go on the offensive, hard. Part of any war is disrupting the enemy's ability to operate, and that starts by shutting down his propaganda. That's why we have to take the bastards on in their own homes. We can't let them have any place where they can expect to churn out the lies about us and think that they can go unchallenged. What Kamala and Bernie and Elizabeth Warren are doing, these are not political rallies, they're propaganda rallies. All those black people who were so gung-ho to crash Donald Trump's rallies, they were fools. Trump was never going to do anything for us. And for a black person to oppose Donald Trump, that doesn't move the needle, because that's exactly what we're expected to do. But those people who called themselves heckling Trump at his rallies, in large part, they were just attention whores. They knew that they could get some quickie attention from the white media and they could get a pat on the back from some white liberals. And for them, that was all the motivation that they needed to subject themselves to getting punched, beat up, spat on, arrested, or anything else. Hell, we got some black folks who are so silly, they'll climb on the Statue of Liberty, not to protest how black people are being harmed and killed, but rather to protest illegal aliens being sent back to their home countries. Now, before we go any farther, just for the record, I'm not asking you to shed anybody's blood or to let your own blood be shed. But I am asking you to get your cell phone and to put these clowns on Front Street. We can make it where these scumbags become synonymous with anti-black racism. We can make it clear anybody who's not on board with reparations, that's because you're a racist. We can make it where they understand, hey, you're not going to treat black people any differently than you treated these other groups. We have lost our fear of demanding what's ours. We've lost our fear of not being popular with these other groups. We lost our fear of that. Every serious political movement requires a dedicated pressure group, not only to bring attention to what the movement wants, but also to keep the opposition off balance. We need a pressure group. Street soldiers, call them whatever you want, to disrupt the white media's anti-black messaging and to make sure that when they call themselves trying to lie to the public and claim that their puppets speak for us or that these Democrats can speak for us, they're going to have someone call them on it. Live on air if we can manage it. Disrupting a Trump rally, that's easy. It's easy attention and it's expected attention. No one in the black community is going to say boo if you do that, and the white community fully expects it. But you go confronting the administrative arm of white supremacy's control opposition, that's hard because the white media has created a narrative. The white media is the fourth branch of government, so their job is to support the other three. The society has been assigned one of two authorized do-nothing political parties to vote for. One party whose job is to appeal to the white majority who stick closest to traditional white norms, and the other who is allegedly supposed to represent everyone else, but primarily white people who allegedly don't stick to those traditional white norms. But the actual job of the political parties is to keep people believing in a system that doesn't work. Because when citizens don't go along with an electoral system, the only other move is revolution. Hell, you even have racists like David Simon who admitted that. He had to admit that when enough people are on the outside looking in, someone's going to pick up a brick. Because when people stop believing in the system, there's always the brick. So you need people to believe in the political parties. And a great way to do that is to have the media show constant images of how the appointed constituencies of these parties, how they love their political parties so much and believe in them so much, and how they don't like those other guys, like football teams. But what happens if the constituents don't love their assigned party? What if the people hate the party that's been assigned to rule over them? And what if rather than join the opposition party, the people instead decide that they no longer are going to play the political game anymore? You have people who are setting a very dangerous precedent. That's what's happening. And that's why you got some of these white supremacist some of these white supremacist agents who will be showing up in the comments section or on my Twitter feed saying, we can't let Trump get reelected. And you know how dangerous it is for you to not be voting? Yeah, I know exactly how dangerous it is. That's the entire point. You see some of these black Democrat dead-enders online with their predictable whining. Brother, you out here playing a game of political chicken. Damn right I am. And I'm not going to be the one who blinks. I'm not going to be the one who chickens out. I'm going to stay the course. This is a game of political brinksmanship. Damn right. And I'm prepared to go all the way. I'm prepared to go over the edge with it because we ain't got a damn thing to lose. We ain't got a damn thing to lose. And that being the case, you're damn right we're going all the way with this. You're damn right we don't care what the fallout is, because ain't nobody cared about the fallout for us, so we ain't caring what it does to the society. And it's exactly how it sounds. The white media simply cannot believe that the black descendants of slaves don't trust white people in positions of power to fix a problem that they themselves created. It's okay for right-wingers to attack Democrats. That doesn't destroy the Democrat voters' faith in their assigned party. But for us to attack the Democrats, that puts everyone on notice that all bets are off. The seeds of a revolution are not people whining about taxes. The seeds of a revolution happen to be when people decide that we're not going to find any of these candidates acceptable. We don't believe in the system. You see, King George and Prime Minister Grenville, they could have given the rebels of the 13 colonies lower taxes, but what they said was the issue happens to be no taxation without representation. The problem wasn't the taxes. The problem was the representation. They didn't like their choices of candidates. Wasn't even a matter of, do I get to vote for Prime Minister Grenville? They were like, hell no, we don't like any of you scumbags. We're trying to put you out of our system. That's what happened then. And the white media is scared that we're fomenting the same thing now. For us to attack the Democrats, that's a watershed event. Because as history has shown, all it takes is about 7% of the population to be able to pull off a revolution. Do I need to remind you that the descendants of slaves in this country are 13% of the population? This is how you destabilize an entire political system. And white power knows that because that's what they do around the world with only a handful of recalcitrant traitors, whether it be in Egypt, Venezuela, Indonesia, Brazil, what have you. Whenever it's time for them to try to foment revolt in these countries, they get a comparative handful of people to do it, not even 2 or 3% of the population, but they put a huge amount of resources in the hands of that handful of people. They know how easy it is to be able to subvert an entire country's system of government. They know how easy it is because they've been doing it for the longest time. It's what's going on in Venezuela right now. The guys who are against Nicolas Maduro, that white ruling elite, they're only a handful of the population, but they're able to exercise disproportionate heft because they're being supported by the United States. And they got the international media that refuses to give any line other than theirs. The U.S. is supporting and aggrandizing an opposition party who refused to even compete in the last election. That's something the white media don't tell you. Yeah, Nicolas Maduro won by a landslide. That's because the opposition party declared that the elections were invalid and illegitimate and said, we won't take part in this fraud. Yeah, because you saw which way the polls were going. But that's what they said. The opposition party were saying that the elections were absolutely useless to influencing policy. Nicolas Maduro's opponents didn't go home and sulk, however. What they instead decided was that elections were no longer going to be their means of changing things in Venezuela. Oh, they still wanted change, they just weren't going to the ballot box. People tend to take their cues from black folks in the United States because we are the most visible, sustained example of sustained opposition to injustice anywhere in the world. And we've also been, without tooting our horns, the most creative about it. Because that's what happens when you ain't got a whole lot of resources to work with. You got to get real creative with what little you got. So everybody else understands that we provide the only working models for how you're supposed to actually fight for justice in an unjust society. They know that. And whether they want to admit it or not, they take their cues from us. So when we turn our backs on this phony election system, that can become habit forming for these other groups. When you have sizable portions of the society who declare that the electoral system is invalid, that means you have a sizable portion of the society who are declaring that the country is not a democracy. Because democracy requires the population to agree that, yeah, we live in a democracy. And yeah, the ballot box, that's a way to change things. We got people who look and say, we're dropping out of the electoral system because we declare it invalid. And that means that the people who are in office, a sizable portion of the population, looks at them and says, you are illegitimate. Listen, you got to understand the real function that election serves. See the election the way that your enemy does. When you call yourself going to vote, What you're actually doing is giving a vote of confidence to the system that you're under, the political system that's ruling over you, and all the things that it does. You're actually saying that I believe in this system. You know the candidates are not elected, they're selected, and you're not the one who selected them. You don't approve of their policies, and you have no chance of ever getting them to do what you want or need, but you clearly believe that if you just keep on voting, something's going to change. You're going to keep doing the same thing, but you expect a different result. When you go to the ballot, you're doing a hell of a lot more than merely casting a vote. You are reassuring the society, or rather you're reassuring the white powers that be, that they still have your full and total obedience. And make no mistake, you're the one who's showing obedience because the creeps in political office damn sure aren't obeying you. That's why the 1% never sweat who's running for office, because they're the ones who chose who chose all the candidates. The people didn't choose the candidates, the 1% did. Under white supremacy, the ballot is nothing more than a symbol of surrender. Your ballot has no power because you have no power. You're getting the political process all wrong. And no, it's not putting the cart before the horse to demand power in your hands before the vote, because your vote cannot be weaponized to the fullest without the power for you to punish those who refuse to bend the knee. The 1% don't get their way because they have the most votes. The 1% doesn't rely on elections for their power, but they do rely on elections as a means of controlling you. And people get angry about this. People have gotten divorced because one spouse supports a candidate that the other spouse didn't like. The way that they act, you would think that they were getting something out of all of this. They would think the political system was actually doing something for them. But just like with the white media, white power has taken their fiction and turned it into everyone else's reality because you keep playing along with it. And every 2 to 4 years, you confirm that you still haven't wised up to the scam. You're mindlessly validating that you believe in this country's political system, that you agree that any changes in the society have to come through the individuals who are in elected office. That's what you're validating. You're validating that the legitimacy of Bernie Sanders and everything that he does. The people in political office are not legitimate unless they are executing your will. If they're not executing your will, that makes them traitors, not representatives. What's the difference between an unelected autocrat and a duly elected representative? Whether or not you agree that they are legitimate. That's what makes the difference. You're agreeing that even though they've done nothing for you and they ignore your demands and they lie to your face and they enact laws specifically meant to harm you, you're going to keep on voting anyway from the slate of candidates that they keep presenting to you. When you have a candidate who tells you to your face, I'm not going to do anything for you, no. That is someone who has issued a formal declaration of political war against you. This is political, social, and economic war. See, that's the real reason why it was necessary to have a 15th Amendment, because the 15th Amendment was meant to be the solution to a political problem that would come out of the overthrow of slavery. Now that you had all these ex-slaves running around, well, you need a way to contain them politically. And the only way that you can contain people politically is if they allow themselves to be contained. That's the reason why they had to bring black folks into the electoral process, not because they wanted our voices to be heard, but it was in order to get us to willingly get on their political treadmill. Because, you see, people who vote, people who continue to show their unwavering belief in a particular electoral system, those guys don't tend to become revolutionaries. When we crushed Kamala Harris, we sent a message to everyone. Oh, those descendants of slaves, we're still interested in policy, all right. We're still determined to get our way, but we're not putting our faith, our money, or our vote in the hand-picked political puppets of white supremacy. We have shown that we're going to get our way or we're going to blow this damn system up. We'll make it unworkable. They cannot assume anything about us anymore. We go from being reactive to proactive, and that's how you win fights. So all I'm going to say is, for those folks out there who don't believe that they need to become part of that pressure group that we need to get in the face of the white media, in the face of these candidates, and make it known that we are not going to allow them to hijack our reparations, that we're not going to allow them to define anything, that we are going to be calling the shots. We're going to be the ones determining the terms of the discussion, and it's going to be done to our satisfaction, that we are not going to be merely involved. We are going to be running the show top to bottom, beginning to end, on this whole reparations thing. As long as you guys are on board with that, we can win. But for the folks out there who, as far as you're concerned, you're going to be armchair warriors here, or as far as you're concerned, well, Professor Truth and those people who believe in getting off their butts and doing something, they'll fight my battle for me. Nah, I'm not fighting your battle for you. Everyone is going to have to give an accounting of themselves. Everyone's going to have to show the work that they've been putting in. We're going to purge ourselves of the people among us who were not built for this. If you're scared, then say that you're scared so we can dump you where we found you. If you're lazy, just say that you're lazy and go back to Xbox or listening to Cardi B or watching television. If you're insecure about being black first, and well, you're one of those black folks who just don't feel right unless white folks are perfectly pleased with you, then just say that you're desperate for white approval and be done with it. And we'll be done with you. But we are committed to this course of action. No one is going to dissuade us from it. No one's going to distract or derail us from it. Nobody's going to come along and try to get us to settle for less. We have made up our minds that we are dedicated to this course of action. And even if it brings this country to its knees, even if it brings this country down, so be it. Because simply put, no matter how many black bootlicks the white media trots out calling themselves, saying, oh, we're going to define what reparations are, and we're also going to define whether or not they've been paid, no matter how many white Democrats and white Democrat flunkies call themselves deciding what reparations are, the issue isn't settled unless and until we say that it's settled. And at what point will that be? Well, here's a hint. It's going to be when a lot of people, a lot of non-descendants of slaves in this country are extremely, extremely unhappy. They will be as unhappy in a single moment as we have been for the last 400 plus years. And you know what you call that? You call that justice.